remembering, Jan?
There will be a lot of things that I will forget, but our hope today is that we will end at 3 at the very latest. It might involve Jan speed talking a little bit, and there's so much to learn as a COM member and certainly as a liaison. It's almost as if you serve 3 years and you finally get the hang of it, and then you rotate off, or you're figuring out how everything works. So I hope everybody can ask a lot of questions.
I am hearing a lot of background noise, not sure where that's coming from.
What does it sound like? Does it sound like an airplane taking off?
Maybe we'll all mute, except for when people are asking questions or speaking.
Yes.
I might give it just another 2 minutes.
Okay.
1 minute. Peter's going to open with a prayer and just a quick word of welcome before Jan tells us everything we need to know. Peter, do you want to, I guess we'll just start.
I'd be happy to do that. Hi, my name is Peter Henry, and I am one of the co-chairs for the Committee on Ministry this year. I've spent the last 2 years and some change as a member of the North Cluster, serving as a liaison to the few churches, some of them in significant transition. So learned a few things, looking forward to learning some more today. And I think Georgia Presley, I've got some people on my screen. There's Georgia Presley. Georgia is the other co-moderator for the co-chair for the Committee on Ministry from the South Cluster, right, Georgia?
Right. Thank you.
So we're going to tag team this year, and hopefully we'll be able to make some things happen and respond to our congregations as needed. I'll make sure I offer a short prayer. I heard Lisa get in the dig for the minister when she said a quick prayer. So if you all will please join me. We are thankful, oh God, that when we journey in this life, we do not do it alone. You call us into communities of faith, and we are blessed to be part of the body of Christ called the Presbyterian Church USA. Thankful for this limb that we call the Presbytery of Charlotte. Give us attentive ears and give us open hearts that we might know how to serve our siblings in Christ in whatever way is necessary for them to know themselves connected and loved and part of you. So bless us in this time with the gift of your Spirit. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Mhm.
Okay, folks, here we go. This is being recorded. So for those who have missed it, but even if you're going to need a refresher, you will be able to get it on our Presbytery has a YouTube channel. And Lisa Dillard, I lost you. There you are. Is it on the YouTube channel?
I have no idea, but once Tamara gets it loaded wherever it is, I'll email everybody.
Y'all, that's Lisa Dillard, who is the queen of all things. She does every detail in the office for COM. So she's the person who will receive contracts that have been signed. She's the person who you share information, any kind of information that would go in the Presbytery packet or shared with the rest of COM or shared with the clusters. It would go to Lisa. Also joining us, I'm looking for her, is Alice Ridgell. Alice, would you wave also? Alice is the Associate General Presbyter. She staffs the Ministry Resource Committee, which also is divided up into clusters and liaisons. Actually, they're called connectors. Those connectors do completely different work from what COM does, and I'm not even going to get into that. We can talk about that later, but I want to get everybody to kind of focus on where we are. some people learn better with pictures and some people learn better with papers. And so we're trying to do both today. And so Lisa Dillard sent a number of pieces of paper attached to, I don't know if it's all to this Zoom link or to others, but if you can, if you could, I'm going to be referring to them. Some of them say one is liaison initial contact, one is how the clusters are broken up, one is just about COM training in general, and then I'm going to be sharing with you some slides and then also the website. If you don't know me, I'm so sorry. My name is Jan Edmiston and I'm the General Presbyter and I staff Committee on Ministry. And so every day is a school day for COM. Some of you will think you know everything about COM, and I don't know everything about COM. So we're always learning things. And so we're just going to take it away, and I'm going to share my screen and hope for the best. Okay. Okay, can everybody see a very colorful slide that says COM training the basics? Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
I am going to invite anybody who needs to ask a question. There'll be time for questions at the end, but if you have a question right in the middle, please interrupt me, please, please, please. And you need to just speak up because I can only see the screen here and not you. So don't raise your hand or anything, just say, excuse me, and speak up. The same is also true for both Georgia and Peter and Lisa. If there's something that I am leaving out, please just speak up and throw in your 2 cents. All right. This is the most basic thing. We are the Presbyterian Church USA. That may be very, very obvious to you, but there are other Presbyterian denominations and they are not us. We love them. They are our friends, but we're not in the same denomination. And I'm talking about the Evangelical Covenant Order or the Covenant Order of Evangelical Presbyterians, the Associate Reformed Presbyterians, the Presbyterian Church in America, the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. These are all wonderful people, but we are not in the same denomination. And the only reason I share that with you is that sometimes we will have pastor nominating committees chaired by somebody who doesn't realize that we are the PCUSA. And so they start interviewing just all kinds of people. This happened once. A PNC chair contacted Gordon Conwell and said, could we get some names of your recent graduates? And they got all the ones who were Presbyterian. So they fell in love with somebody who was not in our denomination. And then it just makes everybody mad and it's wasted their time. So we are part of the Presbyterian Church USA. We have 93 congregations in 7 counties. And I love this picture because you can see the green ones are the North cluster. We're divided in clusters. The purple ones, the kind of pinkish purple, are South cluster. The kind of purplish blue is West cluster, and the East cluster is in red. So you can see right there how spread out we are. We have co-moderators for each of our clusters, and the cluster meetings are so, so important. If you don't learn anything else from this training, please know that attending the cluster meetings is essential, and each of the clusters meet on a regular basis. It's not quite once a month, but it's almost once a month, and there's a schedule that I think you have been given, and if not, you will be given. All right, the cluster meetings are important. We'll get to that in just a minute, but I can't say it enough. The cluster meetings are very, very important. You must attend. Okay, more basics. There are 3 kinds of pastors in the Presbyterian Church USA, according to the Constitution, which is the Book of Order. There are called and installed pastors called permanent pastors. There are temporary pastors, and they are the ones with annual contracts. So they're not called and installed, but they are temporary pastors. And there's pulpit supply where there is no contract at all. The permanent called and installed pastors are elected by the whole congregation. They are installed by the presbytery, and they can only be dismissed by the congregation and the presbytery. So let's see that somebody gets crazy at C.N. Jenkins and thinks, I would like to fire Jerry Cannon. They can't. The presbytery and that congregation would vote. Everything is like a three-legged stool. If you can imagine a stool with three legs, where one leg is the pastor, one leg is the congregation, and one leg is the presbytery, especially for permanent called and installed pastors, all three have to agree on terms of call and other things. So here are just some examples of some of our wonderful called and installed pastors, including our own COM leader, Heather McIntyre, who's down in the lower right. There are temporary pastors. The temporary pastors are not elected by the congregation. They're elected by the session. They have renewable annual contracts, and it's really important that we as COM people know that the contracts have to be renewed every year, and the contracts are approved by the clusters. So for example, on your far left there is the Reverend Reggie Tuggle. He's a temporary supply pastor at Greer Heights, which is in the West Cluster. So the West Cluster would approve Reverend Tuggle's contract. These are different kinds of temporary pastors. The temporary supply pastor has an annual contract. A commissioned pastor used to be called a commissioned ruling elder or a commissioned local pastor. They're now just called commissioned pastors, and they are ruling elders who've received special training and been commissioned by the presbytery to serve in one specific church. So this is Katie Sloan, who serves as the associate commissioned pastor of Philadelphia Church. Then we have our own COM member, Brian Hovey. He's an example of a transitional pastor, also called interim pastors. And so they have annual contracts as well. And again, they are elected by the session. And then we have Dana Purdom, who is still a student at Union Seminary, but she is serving as a student pastor with the permission of the Committee on Preparation for Ministry and the cluster. And she is in the West Cluster serving the Avenue. So the West Cluster would approve her contract. She is supervised by Lorenzo Small, who moderates their session. Because she is not yet ordained, she cannot moderate the session quite yet. Then we have pulpit supply pastors, and they can be found on the website. I'll show you this in a few minutes under COM policies and forms. They can only preach twice a month without cluster approval. So let's say that we're a church that doesn't have a pastor, but we really like James Thomas being our guest preacher. Well, James can only preach twice a month unless there's some kind of contract or cluster approval. And you'll see down below quite a few people who are popular preachers. They're all on our preaching list. You'll see one of them, the one standing behind the microphone, is a student. This is Kirk Lewis. He's a student at Union, so he's not yet ordained, but he has permission to preach in our churches. Some of these people are retired. Some of these people are validated ministries. On the far left is Caroline East, who happens to be the chaplain at Sharon Tower. So she's free on Sundays and often preaches. Eleanor Shell is the blonde one with the headband. She is between calls, and so she is available to preach. But there are lots of folks on that list. And if people want to have a preacher that has already been approved, that would be where to go. Some of our churches will find Cousin Eddie from Tennessee who is available to preach. That may or may not be a good thing, but it's good for the clusters to be on top of who is preaching in your congregations.
Jan, may I just jump in for 1 second?
Yes, please.
I believe I included in all the documents that I sent to you, the temporary pastors report.
Yes, thank you.
And it is by cluster. And so you can see how many churches do not have a called and installed pastor. So in some instances, next to a church's name, there's a name of a temporary pastor. Sometimes you'll see a line. That means they don't have a what are you calling it? A called and installed permanent pastor. They don't have a temporary pastor. They are just using from the pulpit supply preacher list.
Yes.
So that gives you a good idea of how many, and there are a lot of temporary type positions we have.
Yes, thank you. A lot of our churches that have temporary pastors do not think that they can afford a full-time pastor, or maybe they truly can't afford a full-time pastor. Called and installed pastors are all required to receive the Presbyterian Church's Board of Pensions health plan and pension plan, which is very expensive. It's very good. It's a very good plan, but a lot of churches cannot afford that, which is why they have temporary pastors. However, our presbytery has some resources to help in certain circumstances to help cover Board of Pensions coverage. And I can get to that at the end if you have questions. The slide that you're looking at now, a couple things about temporary pastors. Again, they are elected by the session, not the congregation. So the session has the power to end the contract, as well as the power to start the contract. Please remember that there are renewable annual contracts, and the contracts are approved by the clusters, not the whole COM. And this is a new thing that you will see, the first bullet point. Our COM leaders at the end of 2021 looked at all of the minimum salaries, or all of the salaries, I should say, for all of the temporary pastors, and they ranged from a ridiculously low amount of money that was the same as they pay at Jimmy John's. And then we had people who were being paid pretty well. And so we have established a new policy that all salaries, the minimum for temporary pastors, is going to be $23 an hour for North, South, and West clusters, and $20 an hour for East clusters, which is corresponds with what the minimums are for called and installed pastors in terms of context, meaning rural churches versus urban or suburban churches. Now, this will be a sticker shock issue for some of our churches, but they have until 2024 to catch up. I'll be reminding you, and our other leaders will be reminding you of this, but we had one pastor who was working, he's retired, and he volunteered this, but he was working for $2,000 a year. And I sort of feel like, and I think COM's leadership felt like if a church cannot afford to pay their pastor more than $2,000 a year, they just can't afford a pastor. And then they need to have a conversation about whether or not they are a sustainable congregation. Again, contracts must be approved annually by clusters. And Lisa Dillard is the one that gets those contracts. And so she will send out reminders every once in a while. But if you can be on top of when those contracts need to be renewed for your churches, that's very helpful. Any questions about this? Just speak up.
And on that temporary pastors report, you will see that some contracts are currently out of date. So
Yes.
These need to be worked on by the clusters.
Great. Okay, also, temporary contracts are always for 1 year, unless the cluster agrees to do something different. But please don't. Even if you think you'll only need somebody for 6 months, or you'd like to have somebody for 3 years, it's an annual contract for 1 year, because there's a 30-day out on either end. Either the pastor could give 30 days notice, or the church could give 30 days notice. There are some legitimate reasons why a pastor would only be there for 6 months, or they want somebody to stay for a long time. But it's really important to remember that the contracts are always for 1 year. And so, for example, let's say First Church on the Hill gets a contract signed on March 1st. So March 1st is the deadline for doing it next year too. But if we have to try to hunt them down in 6 months or in 3 years or whatever, it's too much. You can fight me on that if you want, but it's really important. It is possible to have a contract with pastors ordained in denominations other than the PCUSA, or a denomination with whom we are an official relationship might be approved, but we strongly disagree about this. We have a few churches that are served by Baptist pastors. We have found that non-PCUSA pastors do not participate in our presbytery. So those churches miss out. They don't get information. They don't find out about grants. They don't hear about resources because their pastor is not invested in being part of the presbytery. And so we are really, really discouraging this. It's also true that sometimes pastors, and this is rare, but it's sometimes true, but I've had it happen every year I've been here, which is almost 4, where somebody will be removed from, let's say, a Methodist church or a Baptist church. They lose their ordination status, so they decide they can probably become Presbyterian or serve a Presbyterian church. They cannot. I have to do a background check, an exec check on all pastors, whether they're Presbyterian or not. And 9 times out of 10, I will find out that that pastor in another denomination has a cloud over his or her head. And that's why they're not serving in their own denomination. That's not always true, but it's often true. Non-Presbyterian pastor or non-PCUSA pastors generally do not follow our polity and procedures. And so it's not helpful for the church in terms of being a thriving congregation. So now I want to talk about liaisons. These are just some of our liaisons. And you can see that I stole pictures from the internet. So some people look a little bit younger than they might in real life. And some were maybe at a festive moment. Artie Skidmore, who's over there with Will Ferrell from ELF. You liaisons are the heart and soul of COM. The relationship that your church, your congregations have with our presbytery is in your hands. So I don't mean to scare anybody, but if you as the liaison are not easy to work with, don't have correct information, are hard to be in touch with, they email you and they call you, but you don't get back to them, it will impact, 1, how healthy that church is in the future, but 2, the relationship with the whole presbytery. When I preach at other churches, I say, my name is Jan Edmiston, and I bring greetings from the offices of the Presbytery of Charlotte. I bring greetings from the offices because that's where I work. I'm not the presbytery. And you are not individually the presbytery. We are all the presbytery, the 93 churches in Charlotte Presbytery, but we can all do irreparable damage by giving erroneous information to churches. And it takes a generation or more to repair sometimes. So I can't tell you enough. I don't mean that to scare you at all. If you ever have questions about something, say you don't know, and you'll get back to them. Because of course you're going to have questions. I have questions every day, and I have to talk to Tamara Williams, our stated clerk, or Lisa, or somebody else. But our liaisons are so important. And so if I visit a church and say, who's your COM liaison? And they have no idea, that concerns me. So the requirements of a liaison, and I think this is maybe one of the sheets of paper that you got. Is that true, Lisa Dillard?
It is, it's listed.
Okay, great. It says just this very thing. You are required as a liaison to attend the quarterly COM meetings. The whole COM meets quarterly. And then the monthly cluster meetings, and you received a calendar. If you don't have a calendar, let somebody know, but you should have received a calendar of all the meetings from Lisa.
Jan, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Must the cluster meetings be monthly? Can we do them quarterly?
You could do them quarterly, sure. And I know East Cluster is a little bit different. The meetings that happen the same month as a presbytery meeting, some clusters don't meet that month. So for example, we have a February presbytery meeting, so some clusters don't meet in February, but that's really up to you. But yeah, if the East Cluster only wants to meet quarterly, that's fine. I attend all cluster meetings, and that really is helpful to me in terms of both my reminding the cluster of things that they need to be reminded of, but also so I know what's going on in all of our churches. And at the cluster meeting, let's say you've been given 3 churches, you will be expected to report on what's happening in that church. And the report might include something like the pastor has announced his retirement at the end of 2022, or the clerk of session has COVID, or I don't even know. Their pastor has some health issues and we're going to need somebody to fill in with preaching. I mean, it could be just a whole bunch of different things, but you need to attend those quarterly COM meetings. There are good excuses for not attending COM meetings and cluster meetings, but it really has to be like your hair is on fire or your child's hair is on fire. We have some members of COM who have almost never been to meetings, and it shows in terms of their relationship with their churches and also the church's relationship with the presbytery. Number 2, become familiar with the resources available on the Presbytery of Charlotte website, especially the 2 boxes devoted to COM. I am going to switch out this screen, and I'm going to go to the screen that is the Presbytery website, if I can find it. Dang. Okay, hang on. I'll get there in just a second.
While Jan's looking for that, let me just say that the majority of questions I get can be answered by going to the website.
Yes.
So please, please just spend 1 hour and just kind of go through and see what is available. Because what we're talking about today is not going to include everything.
Right.
So see what is on there. And going back, I didn't jump in when you were talking about the contracts, Jan.
Yes.
But just this week, I have gotten 2 contracts that were not on our form.
Yeah.
They kind of just made them up and put in information on what this person is going to be doing. And the clusters are going to stop approving these. In fact, 2 of them, they have sent them. I had 3. 2 have been already sent back to the church to put it on the correct form. Now, chances are the reason they're on the incorrect form is because the liaison didn't help the church use the correct form. So
Right.
please, please know your forms.
So do you see the Presbytery of Charlotte website? Is it up? You have to answer yes. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to just walk through this with you. You will see if you look at all these different boxes, there's a box called Committee on Ministry. And when I click that box, well, I don't want to see that picture, although that's beautiful. When I click that box, I get down to COM church liaisons by cluster. Here's the contact information for our 2 COM leaders, Peter and Georgia. Here are the COM cluster co-moderators. So North Cluster, the co-moderators are Valerie Hicks and Alan Buckner. They are Lisa McLennan and Vicki Smith. In the South Cluster, they are Lisa Raymaker and Mark Lee. In the West Cluster, and they are Artie Skidmore and Neil Watkins in the East Cluster. And so note that there are 3 Lisas. So when you tell me that Lisa wants me to do this, I need to know if it's Lisa Raymaker or Lisa McLennan or Lisa Dillard. But you can just see all of that right there. Also, you'll be able to see the different churches. Some of you have not been assigned leaders for the future. And so this is last year's, and you will be assigned at your first cluster meeting what your clusters are, what your churches are.
I'm just waiting on 1 cluster.
Okay.
And then, so by next week, it should be all up on that part.
Great. Okay, so that's the first COM. COM has 2 boxes.
Jan, go to the bottom if you don't mind on that first box.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me go back to that.
Because there's
On
a
the bottom.
lot.
Oh, yes,
there.
yes,
This has a lot of information right there.
right there. So look at all this, folks. Here are the meeting dates, the ministry model, liaisons, the cluster leader report form. That's what the cluster leader will send to Lisa after the cluster meeting. Steps for a COM liaison working with an PNC or a PNC. Look at all this. Safe hiring solutions. Everything you need is going to be right here in terms of all kinds of information. And you can see Board of Pension even. You don't even have to be called and installed. If you are a called and installed pastor, you must be in the Board of Pensions, but even if you are a temporary pastor, you can get the minister's choice plan. You could get certain parts of Board of Pensions. And so we have a very good area leader in Elizabeth Little. She'll be doing a presentation about Board of Pensions at some point this year. She does it every year just to kind of give us an understanding of what the Board of Pensions is able to offer. But look, there's all kinds of information. So before you call Lisa Dillard, you want to make sure that you've gone through here to see if what you need can be found right there, because it probably can. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. And then the other COM box on the main website is COM policies and forms. Just going to click that. People will always say, Jan, I can't find the pulpit supply list. Here it is. It's just right here. And you can see, if you click that on, we've got all kinds of people who are retired, validated ministries, seminarians. This is the policy in terms of what they get paid. That's the actual policy. Here's the list, sorry.
And how do they get approved to get on that list?
They contact me and I do a background check if I don't know who they are. And if they are a minister in good standing, they pretty much get on the list. Or if they are a candidate, you'll see here in red, some of our candidates, they're under care of our presbytery. Some of these people, Marcy Doak, for example, is certified, ready to receive a call. She's just getting ready to be called somewhere. She would be available to preach, but there are lots of people here. CLPs are commissioned pastors. We've got some people who have been trained. They are ruling elders, but they've been trained, and you can see there's all kinds of contact information. If you're a church in, let's say, Norwood, you may not want to find a pastor who lives in, I don't know, Harrisburg. So look at the addresses and see who might be kind of close to where your church is. But we've got all kinds of people here who are very good preachers. And sometimes your worship leaders in your churches, where you're the liaison, might need to have that information. Here's a good example. Fred Gross is a retired pastor from the United Church of Christ, and he has been approved after meeting with him and doing all the background checks to be a preacher. There's Carolina East, who I mentioned before. So we have a lot of options. I will also say something about racism. I mean, I could say a lot of things about racism, but I was asked when I first came to this presbytery, and I'm embarrassed to even say this out loud, but I was asked to go to the pulpit supply list and put a B beside all of the Black preachers and a W beside all of the white preachers. Now, we also have some Asian American preachers, but that wasn't the request, because she said that their church, which was white, had hired a guest preacher who was Black, and that they did not really want a Black preacher. Okay, that was about the first week that I served this presbytery, and I almost lost my mind. We are trying very hard to be an anti-racist presbytery, and you know, churches know their own people, but it is one of the great joys and privileges and pleasures to have a variety of kinds of preachers. I would hope that every predominantly white church would call people of color to preach every once in a while. That may also be the case for our African American churches, but please know that this list reflects the diversity of our presbytery. And I maybe didn't even have to say that, but I'm saying it anyway, just because sometimes we need to hear it. This page also has all kinds of information about mileage reimbursement. When you have a guest preacher, you need to also pay that person's mileage. That would be something to share with your churches. And then if you ever have to travel someplace far away for COM, you could submit your mileage. And if it's not covered by something else, this is often true for ruling elders. If you are asked to travel, I don't know, to Hamlet, North Carolina for something, and you live far away from Hamlet, you can ask for reimbursement, and Donald Latham, our presbytery's treasurer, will reimburse you according to these numbers. A lot of people don't do that, but if you feel like you want to and need to, that is perfectly fine. Here are the policies and forms for everything else that you would need. I'm just going to point out a couple of these. All called and installed pastors get sabbatical. That's our policy of the presbytery. We've got parental leave policies. This is a really important one that I'm pointing to here, the former pastor policy and covenant of closure, that when a pastor leaves, whether that pastor retires or moves away or becomes, a hot dog salesperson, they need to sign that covenant of closure. And I'll talk about that more in a minute, but that's where it is. And then once it's signed, and it's a good time, I'll talk about exit interviews in a minute. When you're meeting with a pastor who is leaving and you're having an exit interview, that's a really good time to have them sign this. And then that needs to go to Lisa Dillard. And I'll get to that in just a minute. When your church loses its pastor, I'm just going to point to that because I'll refer to that later. Pastor nominating committee process steps. I got a call last week that a pastor who left on December 31st, an elder from that church said, we're ready to elect a PNC and go ahead and call a pastor. Well, no, their pastor's been gone for about 15 minutes and they need to have a transitional pastor before any of that happens. All of this is on here. There are terms of call forms for new calls. And here are the other forms, minimum terms of call. Installation, if you're called and installed, you get to have an installation, and the form for having an installation is here. Other pastor relationships, these explain all the things I've been talking about. Pulpit supply policy, you see that's in more than one place. Our Presbytery youth protection and sexual misconduct policy, the severance policy, the certifying policy, the gracious dismissal policy. If there's a church that decides it really needs to leave the denomination, that's the policy for that. So again, please acquaint yourselves with these. If you can't find something, always call me or Lisa, but honestly, most of the time you can probably find it. Okay.
Do churches have to meet the minimum terms of call if it's not a new pastor coming in?
So let's say that I got installed in 2020 and what I agreed to come was the minimum in 2020. When the minimum goes up for 2022, that doesn't automatically, I don't automatically get that increase because I came in 2020. I would strongly suggest that a church at least pay a cost of living adjustment to their pastor. Some pastors or some churches don't think they can afford to do that, but I am more than happy, just as the general presbyter, to go with you liaisons to have a conversation with sessions about that. We have some pastors that have not had a cost of living adjustment in 10 years. That's ridiculous. That means they've been making less and less money every year, and chances are they're paid the minimum anyway. That's no way to treat your pastor. And it also does not point to a good and thriving relationship. Anyway, does that answer your question, Georgia?
Jan,
Yes, because there's a lot of churches that their minister is making what he made
Yeah,
1970 or something. They're
That's
way
right.
behind.
that's right. Somebody else was about to say something, but I missed Terry Swicegood.
it's Terry Swicegood. Hello, everybody. Regarding exit interviews, is it suggested that the Presbytery liaison be present for those? And if not, what do we do with what's learned in the exit interview?
Great question. So actually the liaison does the exit interview. You can take someone with you, another COM person, but there again are suggested questions that you can find where I just left, and that goes to Lisa. And I always look at it, and then we don't share that directly with we don't share a pastor's exit interview notes with a session necessarily, but we might share parts of it, especially if somebody has left under duress. There's probably going to be a conversation with the session and maybe even the congregation about, so let's look at why your pastor left, and let's talk about that. And here are some good things to talk about during a transitional season.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And every church has a file in the presbytery office. So that's where I put these exit interviews. So all that documentation is in each church's file.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to come, once you're assigned your churches, you're welcome to come to the presbytery office. Just so you know, we're open from 9:30 to 5:30, Monday through Thursday, and Friday, 9:30 to 12. And you're welcome to come and look through your church's file.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the requirements of the liaison, I can't say enough, please attend the meetings. If you can't attend the meeting, let your COM cluster leader know, one of them, to become familiar with the resources on the website. All of us need to take healthy boundary training online, and Lisa Dillard oversees that. When is the next healthy boundaries training, Lisa?
So it's all online, so you can take it at your convenience. And what I plan to do is, in the very near future, I'm going to send you all the specifics on taking it. And the cost is $22. It's online. You'll get a certificate following it. And if you would please email me a copy of your certificate, because I keep up with everybody who's taken it. And it is a requirement in the Presbytery of Charlotte that it be taken every 3 years by all pastors, members of COM, CPM, the Judicial Committee. I think there's one other thing. Our candidates also have to take it.
Yes. And then anti-racism training is, you have 2 years to take it. When is the next anti-racism training, Lisa?
The next anti-racism training is February 16th.
Mhm.
And all of you should be receiving the Presbytery of Charlotte weekly e-blast.
Mhm.
If you're not receiving it, let me know. And I think registration is just about to open for the anti-racism training.
Mhm.
Tamara Williams at the Presbytery office, she keeps up with people's attendance of that training.
Mhm.
And it's offered probably a quarterly. Siobhan's on here, she can answer better. And we're kind of spreading out people taking it. So, let's just say you have about a year to take it.
Mhm. Great. It's excellent. Both of them are very good. And this is not just for pastors, folks. This is for all COM members, ruling elders, and teaching elders, and everybody serving on specific committees of the Presbytery.
How often do you have to take it?
Oh, that's a great question. Is that every 3 years too, Siobhan?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Years.
Yeah, every 3 years.
All righty.
Okay. Now my slides are not wanting to proceed. Dang it.
Is anti-racism training online too, or is that different?
It's in person. It's from 9 to 3. It's a full day, and there's a book that goes along with it.
Okay, I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to start at the beginning for my slides. I'll just go through really fast because this is not wanting me to, it's not wanting to proceed. Okay, so. Okay. Where to begin as a COM liaison? Lisa is going to send an introductory email connecting you, individual liaisons, to the pastor and clerk of session of your churches. So let's say that I am the liaison for First Church on the Hill, and Lisa will send me, that pastor of First Church, and the clerk an email connecting us so that we've had a little, hi, good to, I can't wait to be your liaison, whatever. And then you will meet with the sessions of your churches. You'll introduce yourself. You'll ask the suggested questions of your session. And Lisa sent out what those are. Let's see. She sent out an attachment called Liaison's Initial Contact. And it sort of repeats a little bit of what's here, but there are suggested questions. You need to call your pastor and or clerk, and by your, I mean the church where you're the liaison, and say, I'd love to be with your session and introduce myself and review with your session how we can help your session to be a thriving church. We want to meet you, not because there's anything wrong or any kind of conflict. We just want to connect with you to make sure that you're getting all of the support that the presbytery has to offer. And so in terms of what the presbytery does have to offer, well, dang it, hang on. Here, assistance, hang on, I'm going to go back. This is my problem. Hang on. Well, it's just not letting me do that. Okay, I'm not sure why. Forgive me for this sloppiness. You can help by assisting in times of transition. And a transition could be anything from a pastor is retiring to a new pastor is coming on board. Sometimes it's not often, but sometimes pastors have to leave for a few months for personal reasons. You connect churches to officer training opportunities, to supply churches with interim and transitional candidates as needed, and to assist in other areas related to pastoral ministry. So let me bounce back to supply churches with interim transitional candidates as needed. Let's say that the Cornelius Presbyterian Church in Cornelius would like to have a part-time temporary supply pastor. Rather than going out and finding one themselves, I, as the general presbyter, staffing COM, would get between 3 and 5 candidate personal information forms that I will clear and vet, and I will give them to you as the liaison, and you will meet with that session to share those PIFs. These are all people who have been vetted that I think might be a good fit. If you don't like those, I will try to get other ones. But what a lot of churches do is they will just, again, call somebody that they already know who may or may not be a good fit. I'm not joking when I say call cousin Eddie from Tennessee, because we have that happen all the time where somebody goes, well, I have a cousin who's a pastor and he could probably fill in. No. We want to make sure that people pass a background check, and we want to make sure that this is going to be helpful to that church. It's not just about filling a slot. It's about having somebody who will really help them during this transition. We require that transitional pastors, meaning you had a called and installed pastor, that pastor leaves and you're going to get another called and installed pastor, and in between you're going to have a transitional pastor. We make sure those transitional pastors have had transitional pastor training. And so I guess I can insert this here. One of the things that I do on a regular basis is exec checks for pastors who want to work in churches in this presbytery. It could be that they are a candidate for a quote permanent position, a called and installed position. It could be a candidate for a temporary position. It could be a candidate for a transitional or interim position. But if you have one interview with a candidate, you're working with a church with a PNC, or you're working with a session that's been charged with getting a temporary pastor, you tell them that if they have somebody they would like me to check out, I would be happy to do that. But I do an exec check on every single pastor that is going to meet face-to-face as a candidate. And the exec check means that I call my counterpart and whatever presbytery that candidate is coming from, and we talk about things like, is this person in good standing? Is this person a good presbyter? Would you want this person to be a pastor in another one of your churches? Is this person basically a happy person? Are there any red flags? And then I will contact you, the liaison, and let you know that that person is cleared to continue in conversation with. If the person is not, I can't tell you why. And this is where it is a really it's really important that we trust each other. The only reason I would say it's a red flag is if this person has been brought up on misconduct charges, whether it's sexual misconduct, financial misconduct, or there's something comparable. That's a red flag. That means you cannot, your PNC, your search committee cannot talk to that person. Sometimes there are yellow flags. A yellow flag means you can proceed, but I'm going to suggest here's some questions you're going to want your search committee to ask this candidate. Sometimes I'll be told this candidate does not work well with women, or this candidate does not work well with men, or this candidate hates working with children. I will probably not tell you those specifics, but I would probably say, please ask the candidate questions about when they worked with children in the past, or when they worked with female leadership in the past, just so you can discern. It's not that I have veto power. Our PNCs and our sessions get to pick their pastors or their candidates. So I'm not trying to control that. I just am trying to avoid what could be a problem down the road. It's better not to have a pastor than to wish you didn't have one. And I'll hold it up at the end of the meeting, the motto of our particular COM. I'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, any questions about this in terms of helping congregations? Okay. I've lost my cursor. Hang on. Okay. When a pastor leaves, I pointed out to you when we were looking at the website, there is a part on the website that says when a church loses its pastor is what it should say. I've used the word pastor too many times. Please do look at that when a pastor is getting ready to leave. There are certain times that you can always call me, day or night. And one of them is if a pastor dies or has a significant health issue, please call me. If it's 3 a.m, if it's 2 a.m, if I'm on vacation, if it's the middle of my child's wedding, I'll probably wait till after the ceremony is over, but please call me. That's one of the times that you should always call the general presbyter. The conducting of exit interviews, you do it separately. You do it with the pastor before the pastor leaves town, and you do it with the session after the pastor leaves. And also that you have the pastor sign the covenant of closure. Now, this covenant of closure was passed by our COM a couple of years ago, and these are fighting words for a lot of pastors who feel like they are going to be able to come back and visit anytime they want. And if their very favorite parishioner dies after they leave, they can come back and do the funeral. I want you to take a look at that after we finish this training, because it is so important that we have the pastor sign the covenant of closure, because the pastor is not allowed to come back to do weddings, funerals, baptisms, the ham dinner, anything without the permission of the moderator. And what's really, really hard, the best thing for a former pastor is to just say no, because it is very hard when somebody, a matriarch of a church dies, let's say, calls the pastor who is currently serving the church and says, I really want Pastor Smith to come back to do this. It puts the pastor in a very difficult situation, because if the pastor says yes, it's almost like she didn't have any choice. If the pastor says no, it makes the pastor look to be cranky. Julie Hill just left the First Presbyterian Church of Norwood, and she shared her signed covenant of closure in the newsletter with her church, and used a story that is really a great story, that when she first came to First Norwood, a matriarch in the church died, and the former pastor, who knew that person very well, was invited to come and do the funeral without them talking about it first with Julie. And what was wonderful is that that pastor just said no, which gave Julie, as the new pastor, an opportunity to connect with this family in a very intimate way. And it had a positive impact on her relationship with them for the rest of the time she was their pastor. We have a couple of retired pastors that really do miss professional ministry, and they are very active, even to the point of being sneaky in terms of their continued participation with their churches. They do kind of private Bible studies in their own home. And this kind of thing really does hurt the current pastor of the church. So I would really, really encourage you. And again, if you need somebody to go with you for an exit interview, please contact somebody from your cluster. If I have time, I'd be happy to do it, especially if it's a conflicted situation. I'd be happy to, but please.
Jan, are we doing these with these temporary pastors that seem to be there a long time and then
Yes.
they get ingratiated too?
Yes, I think if it's such a temporary position that it's, let's say it's the second interim and that person's only there for a month, that's probably not necessary. But I would say yes, that it's important to have exit interviews, mostly just to hear their perspective on how the church is doing. They would know as well as anybody. And also to just, I think sessions sometimes get so caught up in all of the, like the light bill and the paint colors, that they're not looking at the bigger picture. And it's a good opportunity to be able to look at the bigger picture. How was this pastor helpful to us? How was the presbytery helpful or not during this person's time with us? Does that make any sense? I hope so. Okay. When a called and installed pastor leaves and a church is looking for a transitional, also called an interim minister, here are some best practices. A lot of times when a called and installed pastor leaves, there are some anxious people in the church and they want to call a permanent pastor as soon as possible, especially if they have a big anniversary coming up, especially if there's just a lot of conflict in the church. Here are 8 things to remember when calling a transitional pastor. 1, all of our congregations are in transition. Every single one of our churches, especially during this pandemic, we are all in transition. Something is changing in every single one of our churches. So it's not a time to panic. It's very normal. Remember that a transitional pastor is not your forever pastor. There aren't many people in the world who will move to Charlotte from another state to serve a position for 1 or 2 years. So we're often limited in how many choices we can give a church. We will give them the best possible choice, and I will be the one to send those personal information forms. Again, these will already be vetted people, and I will send as many as I can, but if you get 10 PIFs from me, you're probably not going to get many more. You've got to remember, this is not your forever pastor. This is your transitional pastor after your called and installed pastor has left. Number 3 is huge. Don't choose a placeholder. Don't choose a person without the energy to do the work of transitional ministry. I hear over and over again, not so much anymore, but it used to be that people would get a retired pastor who reminded them of their other retired pastor, and he would or she would preach old sermons and play a lot of golf. We don't want that. We want you to have our churches to have the best possible transitional leader.
And they have to have the training too,
They
right?
have to have the training. That is correct. They can take the training at the very beginning of their service, but it's preferred to have the training before they become a transitional pastor. The transitional pastor's job is very hard because they are supposed to take care of difficult situations you don't want your future pastor to have to deal with. So let's say that there is a blind and deaf organist who has been the organist of the Little Church of the Valley for 20 years, and we love her, but she can't see music to play and she can't hear anymore, but nobody has the heart to let her go. That would be the perfect thing for a transitional pastor to do, so that there is a new organist who is able to better serve that church. And the new pastor who comes in doesn't immediately have to do something that's really hard and might impact his relationship with the church. Number 5, don't do this on the cheap. Some churches think, oh, this would be a great time for us to save money. Nope, your transitional pastor should be paid at least as much as your previous called and installed pastor. Unless something dramatic has happened. So let's say that your last pastor, when they came to be the pastor, there were 1,000 members and now there are only 200 members. I can see why you would pay your transitional pastor less because there aren't as many people. But that's really important. You can't do it on the cheap. They also get full benefits. If your last pastor got full benefits, and of course, 2 weeks of study leave and 4 weeks of vacation, that is what your transitional pastor also gets. In fact, that is true for all pastors. Every pastor, even if you work 10 hours a week, you get 2 weeks vacation and you get, 2 weeks study leave and 4 weeks vacation. And if you want to fight me on that, that's fine. That's how it is across the board in our denomination, or it should be. Number 6, make sure that churches take care of their remaining staff, because sometimes there'll be churches that say, we don't even need a transitional pastor. We can just have the associate pastor do it. No, the associate pastor already has a job. Look for someone who doesn't remind you of previous pastors. That goes without saying, but I can say more about that if you have a question. And this is the most important one, perhaps. God's timeline is not the same as ours, so be patient. So when you're calling a transitional pastor, we're going to work as quickly as possible to have somebody in there as soon after your pastor leaves as possible. But sometimes it takes a little while. I've shared with some of you that Coastal Carolina Presbytery, which is the presbytery east and south of us, they have something like 30 openings for transitional or temporary pastors. And so Gerard Lowry, my counterpart, is really trying to find a lot of transitional and temporary pastors. So it's hard to find people who are really, really gifted and have a lot of energy for doing the work of these roles. Okay, and I think this is my last one, and that is, do you have any questions? So I am going to go back to stop sharing, and I have just given you an enormous amount of work, and it probably all runs together, and I'm so sorry, but the good thing is we have a very good COM and we have very good processes, but we also are open. If there's an exception that needs to be made, if your cluster agrees that this is good for this particular church, it wouldn't be good for this church, but it's really good for this church, we maybe can do it. I can think of some examples that I won't share with you right now, but I really think that we have the possibility to help our churches thrive, and we are in a great presbytery. I could make a case that this is the best presbytery in the country. We have a very good staff. We have really good leaders. Your leaders this year, Georgia Presley and Peter Henry, are 2 of the best COM leaders around. And anyway, we would love to help your churches in any way. And if you have questions, please ask somebody to help you, especially when you're visiting your church for the first time and you really feel nervous. Invite somebody else from your cluster or just somebody from COM to go with you. And you could even have them take the lead and you just learn from how they model how to visit a session. Okay, what questions do you have? You could either speak up or you could put it in the chat.
Jan, can I say something?
Yes, please.
You know, one of the things I know when I first became a liaison, there are 2 things that come to mind. Number one, what if I don't know the answer? And even though we've been encouraged to go to the website and to make sure we've got relevant information, most of us aren't experts at every facet of Presbyterian polity. And it's okay to say to folks, I'll get back to you. I'll have to find out. So you don't have to have all the answers. And it's also important to remember that you're also not called to be their savior. We want to be helpful, but in some cases, it's actually good for churches to do certain things for themselves. I know that my tendency is to, let me find someone for your pulpit. Let me find someone to do this. I mean, sometimes it's really good in a church that champions the ministry of all members to let sessions and congregations figure out how to do some things for themselves that actually makes them stronger in the long run. So just 2 things. You don't have to have all the answers, nor do you have to do all the work for them, but we try and respond in a timely fashion with what we can know, and to assist where needed. but sometimes that assistance is letting folks figure some things out for themselves too. So just two little things from some mistakes in my experience over the last couple of years.
I'd also add that some of them are angry at Presbytery and you're not aware of it, or what the history is, or it maybe happened 30 years ago and they still haven't gotten over it. So don't take it personally, but you can always check with somebody. Probably Tamara is the best resource to give you any history, but you can walk in and they'll say, we don't want you to come. Don't come to my church. So, you know, there's history behind it usually.
If that
Great
happens,
point.
if that happens to you as a liaison, that they won't let you come to the session, they don't want you to, let your cluster moderator know. Who else was about to speak up?
I was just going to say, maybe at your first cluster meetings, and I'm sure it's going to happen, is that you kind of go through all the churches. So if liaisons have changed, they know about the churches that they're now serving. I think that would be helpful. Another thing is, a good way to get to know your church is to study their website. And also you can subscribe to their newsletter and various things in order to get to know them better, and, you know, maybe attend some of their functions once you feel safe with COVID and whatnot. And the final thing I was going to add is, so this connection between you and the church senior minister and the clerk of session is going to happen in emails I send out the first and possibly the second weeks in February. By the end of January, every church should report to Tamara Williams at the Presbytery office who their new clerk of session is going to be. So once I have all that information, I'll be able to send out the letter. And so you'll be on the email. You'll know when these churches know who you are. And therefore, within a couple weeks after that, you should be reaching out to your churches and contacting them to set up a time to go.
And I think the liaisons, like Jan said, are so important to each church. And if something happens in your life that changes the time that you can give to Committee on Ministry, or, you know, you have to have surgery or something, let us know. So we can either cover for you, or if you feel like you need to drop back out off of COM, don't feel bad about it. It's better that you do that than a church feels like the presbytery doesn't care about my church, and it's not their fault.
Other comments or questions?
Well, this is Deanne. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Hey, Deanne.
Hi. I just wanted to offer from past experience. I've dealt with churches in different capacities over the past 10 years nationally on the PCUSA footprint. And one of the things that when you're initially meeting with churches, is to not have so much of an agenda. Go not expecting anything, and know that each church, each house of worship has its own personality. It is a person within itself, and they have their own little quirks, and just accept them in the beauty of it all, because each church is beautiful within itself, but we are all a part of the grand scheme of things. So number one, don't go with an initial agenda, just go expecting to learn. And number two, go knowing that you're dealing with a different person than yourself.
Thank you. That's helpful. And also just be friendly. I mean, don't go in, you know, you're not the Presbytery Police, just go in and say, what's God doing here? Tell the questions under liaison's initial contact. There's some really good questions just to get to know them. And just ask. An important event in the life of our church every year is, whatever. And don't expect them, I should say, do expect there to be a little bit of concern still about COVID, because some of our churches are still not meeting in person. I don't want to confuse you by going to MRC, the Ministry Resource Committee, but I will say that if a church really is feeling anxious, they need help with technical improvements to their sanctuary, that kind of thing, they need to contact their Ministry Resource Committee connector, because that is the arm that works with partnerships, with grants. Our presbytery has a lot of resources to help our congregations. There's no reason a church should have bad microphones right now, but we can help with all kinds of things. And it's not your role to help them with that. That's MRC, but it is, if you happen to hear in your travels that they could be helped with something, that would be a great thing to either contact Alice Ridgel or look on the Presbytery website and find out who your church's MRC connector is, because it's also on the website. Anything else? Any big questions? Are you completely confused? I hope not. We've got some great churches out there, and everyone, like Deanne said, is individual and special in its own way. And some of the greatest people you'll ever meet are in these churches. And one of the great things, especially those of you who are ruling elders, my hope is that you might pick up something in one of the churches that you serve that you can bring back to your own congregation, that, oh my gosh, I'm working with this church, they're doing this really cool thing. Let's talk to them about that, because we might be able to do something like that too. Any questions about exec checks, background checks, paperwork? Wow. Well done. Good. Keep in mind that the schedules have been made for the cluster meetings and the other meetings, and it would be great. Our February Presbytery meeting, we were hoping we would be in person, but we're going to have it by Zoom. So I really do hope that even if you're not your commissioner from your church, that you might come. It's just always good to figure out, see what's going on. Our preacher is going to be Greg Bentley, who was one of the co-moderators of the General Assembly of the whole denomination, and it'll be a great meeting. Peter, Georgia, if we don't have anything else, are we ready to let these folks go spend the rest of their afternoon doing their thing?
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for being here. All of you have a lot of things you could be doing right now, but I really do appreciate it. And just look out for those emails, and it's really going to be great working with you this year. We're really excited. We haven't been able to do it for the past year. Let me think. Yeah, we didn't get to do it in 2021, but ordinarily at the end of the year, we have a big party in December that is in person, and that's my hope. Oh, I thought of one more thing. Hang on. This is a pillow that I have in my office. As you can see, I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says, you can put a toilet in the kitchen. We're going to tell you it's a bad idea, but you can still do it. That's sort of COM's mantra, in that it is not my job as the general presbyter, nor is it your job as COM to tell a church to do something, to call a pastor, to make a decision that they don't want to make, even though we can see that it's going to be a disaster. We want all of our churches to be healthy. We want all of our churches to be thriving and to address what breaks God's heart in the name of Jesus Christ. If a church insists on calling the wrong pastor, we just continue to love them and hope for the best. And anyway, I just say that in Thanksgiving, that God will direct us to be making good choices. Let's close with prayer. Good and gracious God, we thank you for these leaders who have so generously offered their time to do very important ministry in the presbytery. Be with each of them as they go about their business for the rest of this day. And may this be a year where ministry bursts and budgets double and new pastors are called who are great matches and anxieties and conflicts are minimized. This is our hope, Lord, and we need your help in carrying this out. So help us, be with us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.